Memory is a strange thing. We think of it as something that fades, like old photographs left too long in the sun. But memories don't always fade. Some of them linger. They wait in the quiet places, the forgotten rooms of our minds, whispering, echoing, wanting to be remembered. Tonight, we open those doors, stories of sound and silence, of voices that refuse to die, and moments that never really ended. Sometimes the past doesn't let go. Sometimes it records itself, waiting for someone, anyone, to press play. These are the echoes of the forgotten, and once you hear them, you'll never truly forget them again. I've always liked old photographs. There's something comforting about them. The stillness, the clarity, the idea that a moment can be captured and never forgotten. That was before I learned that some memories don't want to stay trapped. It started after my mother passed away. She'd left behind boxes of old photo albums and negatives. Hundreds of them. Going back generations, I decided to scan them all. It felt like something useful to do, something that would keep me busy while the house sat too quiet. Most of them were ordinary, family gatherings, picnics, birthdays. But then near the bottom of one box, I found an envelope labeled "Do Not Restore." Inside was a single 8x10 photograph, an old family portrait, sepia tone, 5 people standing in front of a farmhouse that doesn't exist anymore. The corner of the photo was burned, the surface cracked with age. My mother had written on the back, in faint pencil, 1903, the first picture. I placed it on the scanner, hit preview, and waited as the image slowly filled the screen. That's when I noticed something odd. There was a 6 figure faintly visible in the far right of the frame. A blurred, almost transparent, I thought it was just a flaw, some old exposure damage, until I zoomed in. The figure wasn't part of the photo. It looked recent. The clothes didn't match the era, the posture, the height. Everything felt wrong, and strangest of all, the figure was facing away from the camera. Every other person in the photo looked forward. This one looked toward whoever was taking the picture. I set the original aside, thinking it was just a trick of the scan, but when I checked the next morning, the printed copy looked different. The figure was still there, only now slightly turned, a few degrees more toward the camera. Just enough that I could see the start of a cheekbone. I told myself I was overtired, that the monitor brightness, or the scan settings, or maybe grief itself, was making me see things. But I kept working, restoring, cleaning, digitizing, and every few hours I'd find myself glancing back at that same photograph. Each time the figure had moved, just slightly. By the third day, it was fully turned toward the camera. The face was pale, expressionless, and disturbingly familiar. It looked like me. I tried deleting the file, but every time I emptied the recycle bin, the image reappeared on my desktop. Sometimes renamed, sometimes just labeled IMG0001, and each new version was sharper than the last. Then one night I woke to the faint hum of the printer in my office. When I walked in, it was printing on its own. Dozens of copies of that same photo, each one darker, the background fading further away, until only the figure remained. Just me, standing in front of a house that wasn't mine. Eyes slightly unfocused, like I'd been caught mid-blink. I unplugged everything. The computer, the scanner, the printer, and dumped the photo into the trash. But when I came back upstairs, there was a frame sitting on my desk, a new photograph. Same background, same position, only this time, I wasn't alone. Behind me, barely visible, was the original family. The ones from the 1903 photo, and all of them were facing me now. I left the house that night, haven't gone back since. But a few weeks later, I got a message from a photo restoration forum I used to post on. Someone had uploaded an image under my account. A high-resolution scan of the old photograph. Only now there were 7 figures, and the one farthest to the right, he was sitting at a computer, my computer. I worked as a school janitor for almost 30 years. Not a glamorous job, but it was honest. The kind of work where you keep your head down and listen. To the pipes, the air vents, the way buildings talk when no one else is around. Schools are loud when they're full of life, but when they're empty, they have their own kind of silence, a hollow quiet that hums through the hallways like something remembering the sound of laughter. When the district finally decided to tear down Wellington High, they called me in for one last week of cleanup. Most of the staff had retired or passed on. The classrooms were empty, desks stacked, trophies boxed up. But it was the old choir room that I dreaded the most. Everyone in town knew the story 30 years ago. The music wing caught fire during rehearsal. Faulty wiring, they said. 17 students and one teacher never made it out. After that, the room was sealed off and a new wing was built across the courtyard. But when they handed me the keys, I noticed something strange. On the tag, the label read, Choir Room A, not B, not Old Wing. Just the original one, like it had been waiting. The door hadn't been opened in decades. When I finally turned the key, it took both hands. The hinges gave this deep, metallic groan, the kind that vibrates in your bones. Inside, the air was cold. Not stale, cold, like winter air spilling from a freezer. The room looked frozen in time. Chairs still arranged in half circles, sheet music scattered across the floor, blackened around the edges from smoke. On the far wall, the old upright piano sat under a thick layer of dust, keys yellowed but intact. When I stepped closer, I heard it, faint, almost a vibration at first. A sound so soft I thought it was in my head. Then I realized it was humming, a single steady note, somewhere between the walls. I remember standing there, barely breathing, as the sound grew clearer, layered now like voices blending. A chorus. They were humming together. It was beautiful and wrong at the same time. The kind of harmony you feel before you actually hear it, like the room itself remembered the song, even when no one was left to sing it. I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut behind me with a hard echo I tried to handle. Jammed. The lights flickered, once, twice, then stayed on. And then faintly, I heard a voice. A woman's, warm and clear. All right, everyone, from the top. The humming shifted into melody. Notes filled the air, slow and sweet, like the echo of a hymn through an old church. It was the same piece the choir had been rehearsing the night of the fire, I knew, because the newspaper article had printed the sheet music. It was called Until the Morning Comes. The voices swelled, rising in waves, and as they did, the air grew warm, smoky, thick. I looked up and saw light flickering near the ceiling, faint orange reflections crawling over the tiles. For a moment, I thought I was seeing the fire itself, but then I realized when the flames weren't real. They were memories, light caught in air that hadn't forgotten how it burned. I stumbled forward, coughing, trying to reach the door. Then, through the haze, I saw them. 17 figures standing in a semicircle. Not solid, more like shadows carved from light and smoke. Their mouths moved in perfect sync, eyes closed, singing like they never stopped. And behind them, at the piano, sat the teacher. Her hands moved across the keys, but there was no sound from the piano. The notes were coming from the air itself. She turned her head toward me, eyes open, calm, almost kind. And then she said softly, though her lips barely moved, "We never finished the song." The next thing I remember, I was outside, sitting on the steps with a fireman shaking my shoulder. Apparently someone had seen smoke through the old windows and called it in. They didn't find any fire, just me covered in soot and dust. When they asked what happened, I couldn't explain. I just told them I'd heard music. They laughed it off, said old buildings make strange noises. Maybe they do. But as I was leaving that night, I looked back at the music wing through the glass. I could see the faint flicker of lights in the old choir room, steady, rhythmic, like the glow of a metronome keeping time. And if you stood very still, you could still hear them faintly, a harmony too perfect to be human. I never really believed in ghosts, not in the floating sheet sense at least, but I do believe that sound can hold memories, and that sometimes those memories, Remember you back. It started when I went home after my father's funeral. The house was quiet, unnaturally so. Every tick of the clock, every creak of the floorboard sounded louder than it ever had. Grief changes the acoustics of a house. It turns silence into something heavy, almost alive. My father had been a sound engineer for nearly 40 years. When I was a kid, he used to take me into his little basement studio. Walls covered with egg cartons, shelves full of reels, cassettes, microphones, and these strange metal spools that looked like time capsules. He used to say, "Sound never dies, son. It just waits to be heard again." Those words didn't mean much back then. Now they won't stop echoing in my head. While sorting through his things, I found a wooden box labeled in his handwriting, "Archives Personal." Inside were half a dozen reel-to-reel tapes, neatly stacked, each with little labels written in pencil: Test Tone, Interview, Soundbed 1984. But one stood out. The label was faded, barely legible, just 3 words, "Play when I'm gone." At first I thought it was some kind of farewell message, a sentimental recording, maybe a voice letter or a final note. But the thing about my father was, he didn't believe in goodbyes. I found the old reel player under his workbench, coated in dust. It still worked, surprisingly. The motor groaned, but the reel spun, the tape feeding through the head with that dry hiss I hadn't heard in years. That sound alone pulled me back decades. When I pressed play, I braced myself to hear his voice instead. I heard mine. I froze. The voice that came through the static was undoubtedly mine. Younger, maybe early 20s, but there was no way that was possible. The tape itself looked like it had been recorded 40, maybe 50 years ago. "If you're listening," the voice said, crackling through the hiss, "then he's gone. And now you have to remember." I paused the tape. Every rational part of me screamed that it was a coincidence, a trick of memory, a similar voice, a degraded recording that happened to mimic mine. But I couldn't stop listening. "You don't know me yet," the voice continued, "but you will. And when you do, don't go into the basement after midnight." I stopped it again. This wasn't grief. This was something else. The next night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whirring of the tape reels, the faint hum that seemed to fill the house. At exactly midnight, I heard movement downstairs. A shuffle, a soft metallic click. When I went down, the reel player was spinning. The tape was moving on its own. No one else was in the house. I stood there, cold, crawling up my spine, as the voice came back through the static, whispering now, almost urgent. "He's coming down the stairs. You have to hide." I looked toward the stairway. It was empty, but behind me I heard a floorboard groan. I turned. Nothing. The tape continued. "Don't let him find you this time. Please." There was a long pause. Then, the sound of my own voice gasping, like someone being dragged away, a scrape, a thud. Silence, then, faintly, another voice, older, lower. "Sound never dies, son. It just waits." The next morning, I unplugged the reel player. I packed it back into the box, taped it shut, and carried it out to the curb. Trash pickup was Monday. That night, I woke to the faint whir of spinning reels somewhere beneath the floorboards, playing something waiting to be heard again. When my grandmother passed away, the house came to me. It sat alone on a hill just outside town. A weathered 2-story home that hadn't seen paint or laughter in at least a decade. The porch sagged, the windows wept dust, and when the wind moved through the trees, the whole place sighed like it was tired of standing. I hadn't visited in years. We were never close, not really. Grandma Rose had always been distant. She loved her garden more than she loved company. She wrote letters more than she spoke when she did talk. Her voice always had that faint tremor of someone who'd learned long ago to whisper around secrets. After the funeral, I came to clean the place out. Just a weekend job, or so I thought. But there's something about empty houses that changes time. Every creak, every draft, every small echo. It all feels stretched, like the house is still breathing around you, even after the people are gone. The first night I slept in the upstairs bedroom, the one that used to be my mother's. The bed still smelled faintly of old lavender, and the wallpaper was peeling in thin curls, revealing the plaster beneath. At about 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint, scratching sound coming from downstairs. Not an animal, it was too rhythmic for that. Almost like paper brushing against brick. When I went down, the living room was empty, but the fireplace was warm. That didn't make sense. I hadn't lit it. And yet, faint wisps of smoke curled up the chimney, leaving a dusty scent of burned paper hanging in the air. I remember whispering, "Hello?" But my voice felt small, swallowed by the house. When I got closer, I saw the faint outline of something tucked deep in the ashes. A small metal key, still warm to the touch. The next morning, I found the key's lock. It fit a small wooden trunk hidden behind the firewood stack, its edges blackened with soot. Inside were bundles of old letters tied with ribbons, yellow, brittle paper, sealed with wax and smoke stains. Each one was addressed by hand in my grandmother's neat cursive. To Samuel, 1968. To Mother, 1971. To Clara, 1979. I didn't recognize any of the names, except the last one. The final letter was addressed to me, but it wasn't dated. My name was written in the same elegant cursive. Only this time, the ink looked fresh, as if it had been written recently. I opened one of the older letters first. To Samuel. The paper crackled as I unfolded it. The handwriting was clean, deliberate. You told me you heard them in the smoke again? I told you to stop burning the names. They always come back when you burn the names. I frowned. Another letter. To Mother. The fire keeps them quiet, but only for a while. I can still hear them whisper through the ashes at night. And another. I don't write these for the living anymore. I write them so the house remembers. By the time I reached the last one, the one with my name, my hands were shaking. The seal broke with a soft snap. Inside, the ink shimmered faintly, as if it hadn't dried. If you're reading this, I'm gone. You must not burn the letters. Promise me that, child. Never burn them again. There was a blot of ink, as though she'd hesitated. Then, but if you already did, I'm so sorry. At that moment, I heard something from the fireplace, a faint whisper, then another. Dozens of voices, layered and thin, like breaths speaking from inside the walls. They weren't saying words exactly, more like murmuring syllables that sounded like my name. The air turned heavy, warm. Ashes began to stir on the hearth, lifting in small spirals like smoke in reverse. And in them, faintly, shapes began to form. Faces. I dropped the letter and stumbled back, heart hammering. The trunk's lid slammed shut on its own. Every candle in the room flickered out, leaving just the orange glow from the hearth, pulsing like something alive. Then I heard her voice, my grandmother's, clear, calm, and close, whispering right behind me. I told you not to burn the names. The next morning, the trunk was gone. The fireplace was cold, and in its ashes, 6 new envelopes, all sealed, all addressed in my handwriting. Each with names I didn't recognize except the last one. It was addressed to you. There's a sound that lingers long after silence, the kind that doesn't fade, but waits. Maybe it's the echo of a name we were never meant to hear again. Maybe it's the weight of a memory refusing to rest. A voice, a note, a whisper caught between time and truth. Tonight we listen to those echoes, the ones that lived in rooms, in wires, in walls, and in the fragile space between forgiveness and forgetting. But some echoes don't belong to the past. Some reach forward, calling us from where we haven't yet been. And if you ever wake in the middle of the night, hearing something soft beneath the quiet, a voice that knows your name and speaks like it remembers you, don't answer it, because sometimes the things that whisper in the dark aren't trying to be heard. They're trying to return. You've been listening to Mr. Haunting Whispers, real stories, real fears. Until next time, keep your lights low, and your mind open.
You've been listening to Mr. Haunting Whispers, where every truth leaves a scar. If the story unsettled you, good. That means you were listening. Subscribe and stay close to the dark, because the next whisper might be for you.